So welcome, Kevin, to our little call here. Very excited to have you on. We spoke about this maybe 2 months ago, I
hmm
think. We were chatting, um, and I'll let you give background really on who you are and your journey. We discussed and we'll kind of dive a bit into your backstory. But just so everybody knows, our connection. When did we meet? Like 2.5 years ago?
Yeah, I think probably close to 2 years ago with
Yeah.
Juventus. Yeah, at
It
the
would have
Lego.
been the Lego event. Yeah.
It was the Lego event. Yeah, it
Right.
was.
Okay. So Kevin and I mean, it's a serious topic. We're going to talk about money and all it does and doesn't do for you. But we're setting the foundation here that Kevin and I met each other when we're playing Lego with other guys. Right. That's where we met. So um,
I think to frame it better was I went to meet men who'd been talking to on the internet who would lure me into a room to play Lego with them. It was just a sort of 80s scandals waiting to happen, right?
and we bought into the pyramid scheme. There we
Yeah,
go.
exactly
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're now selling it on.
Mm.
That's the call. Selling on the pyramid scheme. Awesome. Good, Kevin. Let us hear from you. What are you? Where are you from? Why are you? We want to hear all the good stuff. Start at the beginning and take us through maybe a bit of a backstory.
Okay, so I'm Kev Halborg. I'm from war-torn Wales. I'm currently back in Wales now. But I grew up on a pretty sort of rough council estate, and I escaped at the age of 16 to join the army. Thankfully, got out. Did 10 years of the British Army, and then I did 10 years as a uniformed contractor to the US military in 8 years in Iraq and 2 years in what they call the CENTCOM area. Um, and yes, I was fortunate enough to sort of find myself in some unique situations, which were probably was absolutely not prepared for. But based on the situations being so unique, I sort of were able to circumnavigate that in a successful way, really. But from an early age, I was always quite interested in finance and the upbringing I had with just my mother. She always made it very, very clear. One very solid message she nailed home, which was no one's coming for us. You're going to have to get a grip of this yourself. And that's not playing the victim Olympics. It was actually a very good message, very relevant, in fact. And I think it's one that we're not hitting home enough with our education system here right now. I think that's why we see a lot of people in serious despair. But back to my sort of, as I finished life on what we would call the circuit, I was a bit lost, didn't really know what to do. I had a job where I was a protection officer for a diplomat, and we looked after his family in the UAE, but we covered Moscow and Paris, the embassies where he traveled, and it was fizzling out coming to the end. They were much younger, more talented, experienced soldiers than I coming into the circuit. And I was starting to feel that was coming to an end, and I really was a bit lost. There was, the sense of purpose, because I think when you're in the military or a service type organization, there's a sense of purpose as well as your job itself and the income. And I could feel myself losing that. And one night, really strangely, in Paris, we had a Boris Johnson visiting us, and it's his fault because at the time the UAE government were in well, they still are. They're not very close friends with the Qataris. So we were having to book lots of hotel rooms of deceptions, and I was moving all around the night in Paris to different hotels. Um, and as a protection officer or bodyguard, however you want to call it, it sounds very glamorous. It's the least glamorous job you do. You're basically a relatively well-trained PA that drinks a lot of coffee and reads a lot of books because you're just sat in corridors waiting for people. And I'd finished reading my book, and I was literally waiting for about 2 hours. We were about to leave, and then Boris Johnson turned up, a complete shower of shit. We got him into the hotel room, into the corner, and I had to wait outside this hotel room for about 6 hours. French police were there, and there was a bookshelf in the corner, and there was only one English book I could recognize, and I picked it up and I started reading it, and I found it really fascinating. And it was about finance, it's about financial services, and I think you get to have a deep look into my personality that I found this exciting. But it was, and there was little tests at the end of every chapter, and I was filling them in, and I was like, "Oh, this is really cool." And I couldn't put this book down. I got back that night or that morning. Bear in mind, I hadn't slept for about 18, 20 hours, and I just couldn't sleep. It was just, it kept me awake. And I was so fascinated with this book, carried on, rang up the company, asked to do an exam when I was on leave, passed the exam. And when I found out what it was quite a senior exam for financial planners in the UK, and I passed it. And I just started that journey. I started a journey into chartered that way by just complete chance, and it just sparked. It was almost like this was some, this is my new Northern Star. I get to help people with finances. Where the way I grew up, so many of my friends had gone bankrupt. So many of my friends had lived in real despair. People had taken their lives in and around me. A lot of business owners and my colleagues, if you like, that I grew up with. And then I married an Indian girl, and all her family were businesses, and everybody had the same issue. They just had this real tangling around finance. And that was really where I found myself in sort of 2016, 2017. And I came home, carried on studying, and ripped the plaster off and sort of went for it, really. It was quite a plunge because I had no experience, formal experience, but it turned out that my lived experience mattered more than I realized. And yeah, I've never really looked back. I was quite unemployable because I wasn't really going to go in and fit to a normal HR policy, and all that sort of issues probably wouldn't have worked very well. So I had to go it alone early on, which was quite a challenge. But it paid off. We're here now. We're okay. Um, but that's really my journey to where I am now. But I think what's important to me is more important to me, really. But the two overlap. It's just helping people who are living quiet lives of desperation, as I have at certain times, and then making sure my son doesn't do the same. So as a father, being a good father is really helping me become a very good advisor to my clients, because I treat the two in the same way. Um, and I think they're really my two passions, really.
Mm. Wow, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And what I find puzzling, maybe more than fascinating, is I've only known you obviously in since you're an established financial advisor. And if you told me that you had 30 years of that profession under your belt, I would believe you, because I think every time we talk about it, you've got such a deep knowledge, the breadth of people that you advise, the knowledge that you have, the insights that you have, the way you can see how the financial landscape is shifting and how it's affecting people. Um, it's I can't comprehend that this has only been your life for 10 years, right? So what I would like to understand then is, you were saying the things in your kind of previous lives, how they prepared you for this. Let's start with the first 10 years after you left home. I'm assuming living at 16, going to the army, it was really just, looking for freedom, but also safety and security in a very, very different world. What are the things that you now in hindsight look back on that you feel have prepared you for where you're today? What are the things that stand out?
Um, I just think leaning into the uncertainty early on, and just and because I had no choice. I think that helped. Right. I knew this was uncertainty. Yeah, I knew it was going to be scary because I was only 16, as a teenager, right? Um, but I just thought, well, I'm in, I'm either going to fail at this stage, or I'm going to go and do other things. And I went on to do the commando course, and did a few other things. I didn't go into sort of our friends, Gaz, etc. as well, but I just thought, well, if you're going to fail at running at something, you might as well just run at it and just, do it properly, right? And I think that was a good start. And the world was just changing. I was just really lucky or unlucky in terms of timings, but I got into the Green or British Army just as Northern Ireland was coming to an end. But as a teenager, I was on the streets of Northern Ireland. And again, back then it was just normal. But I look back now and I thought, well, actually, that was quite a bit of responsibility it was my 18th birthday, when I was allowed to go out on patrol, and I thought I was the luckiest man alive, because they threw me out at 17. You weren't allowed to go out on the ground then. That happened so quickly and so early on that I then got thrown into sort of junior management in the military very early. So I was a young young Section 2IC and Section Commander by the time I was sort of 23, 24. And then 9/11 happened. So it all just condensed to the point that, and that allowed people like me who like to experiment and give everything a go more of an opportunity because nobody had fought in that type of conflict ever. So I could have a sergeant major above me that might have been in some very elite background, far more elite than me, but he hadn't done the same. We were both new. This is new to all of us, right? And I was very lucky that then I was a reader, and I just found that I just somehow managed to end up in the right place with the right people around me that just allowed me to learn very, very quickly. And because I was just so new, I couldn't carry any arrogance with me, even as a young man. And all young men do, right? But I just couldn't because it was just so new and relatively terrifying that you wouldn't. And I think that prepared me for every other challenge that happened because I tend to just stumble into these things, and they were all quite, if I'm honest, they were quite challenging and quite daunting.
Mm. So stepping into the unknown is the big thing that really it taught you in a way that you were when because the financial world I guess is very very far away from where you were,
Hmm.
but you I guess you learned that you could rely on yourself and you could find a way through no matter the challenges you were exposed to.
It was, and it's not now. It's only now I'm older I can look back with a bit of wisdom that actually the two worlds that I've worked in are almost identical because we were protecting somebody from something, and now I'm doing that's all I'm doing. I'm typically trying to deliver clarity to somebody, which is what I was doing with my young soldiers, or I was young as well, and to myself to a certain extent, right? You're trying to deliver some clarity. You're trying to remove uncertainty, and then you're trying to remove this fear that is at times illogical. Because I mean, fear can be a mile wide and an inch deep, right? And and just stepping into that fear with them, and you just get a wet ankle as opposed to drowning. Um, I think the two worlds are very similar.
Mm. That's fascinating insight. And then if we go to that next phase, which I guess is still very closely related to the first 10 years, um, but I guess a bit more James Bond like, at least the way that I can read it. It's more let's
Like,
frame you like that. Let's
yeah,
frame you like
okay, yeah,
that.
yeah. We'll put that on the short when you post it. Yeah, we'll do
Yes,
that.
yeah.
Right?
We'll do an
Yeah,
AI image of you as
yeah,
James Bond. That will be the
yeah,
thumbnail. So
yeah.
we'll use
I'll
that.
take that. I'll take that.
Um, what happened in those years that still really sticks with you, where you again have maybe found great lessons or insights in terms of, you've now touched upon the stepping into the fear and protecting, and obviously being a bodyguard has that in it. But what else? Because it was different because it wasn't as organized. It wasn't the big military. You were much more by yourself and on your own. Um, what have you taken away from that time?
Well, again, I was quite lucky because it was just new, and it was so it went in Iraq from 2003 to 2011. The American military, which you have to give them credit for, understood they had an arc, a blind arc, and they brought in large amounts of contractors, paid contractors, mainly British military. And it was mainly for the protection roles. But quite early on, I moved into what was called a liaison role. So I spent the bulk of my time in Tikrit, and I still feel like Tikrit's my home. It's really strange. I spent my first 3 years in Iraq in Tikrit, which is Saddam's hometown, and it was obviously an awful place, but it was just home for us, right? And we had to go out and just push the envelope again, and no one had done it before. We weren't the experts, nobody was, and we had this strange fusion, which you would never have been able to do in the British military, but the Americans are just so good at it. They don't buy into the classes, and they're very meritocratic. So we could go out in the day and do some liaison patrols, and then you could come back in and you could be speaking to a one-star general on an equal footing if you were giving him information. And I think what helped as a young man for me for that was it removed um I think it removed barriers, social barriers of being able to speak to people um that are just so much senior or who you would be, immediately intimidated by. I mean, we talk about imposter syndrome, but I think imposter syndrome can be misdiagnosed to sort of by the fact that you sort of elevate. There's a sort of elevate a sort of elevation sort of bias towards people, isn't there? And it helped remove that massively because you'd be talking to somebody one star, and then after you're talking to him, you'll see him on CNN when you're in the DFAC eating food, and he's having an interview about something you spoke to him about an hour ago. It was just so humbling. It was very, very strange. But it was so different to being in the military as a soldier, but we were still being targeted the same as soldiers. And that was, again, something completely new. No one had done it. Well, the people alongside me doing it with me, but it was just new, and we just had to experiment. We had to be constantly evolving, failing fast. That was a big one. Fail fast really was early on, and that I took with me when I did my exams. For example, I found a hack to get from sort of first finding that book to chartered in 18 months was because I deliberately booked every exam ready to fail. And I looked at it as a recce to go and do the exam. I'm going to fail it. I'm going to get some good insight. And then I can sit it again the following week, the following month, the following cycle. I just never failed one. But the plan was for that. So I think without, at the time, I hadn't formalized it that way. But now I look back, it's very logical that that cycle was just laid out for me. Very, very lucky. And again, working alongside the Americans was just culturally massive for me. I learned a hell of a lot of how they had that fusion of sort of academia, military, intelligence, the way they fused it all together, and we're all humble enough to admit that this was just such a massive challenge that they weren't winning. We weren't winning, right?
Mm.
And then moving from that at the end, 8 years of that into this fusion role of what would be back to what we would call a protection officer. At that stage, you were just a highly paid PA of a spoiled Middle Eastern diplomat, but you got to see half of the real world as opposed to the sand and the desert of Tikrit. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating again what you've taken away from that. And that's something that I've always really admired about you, which is the insights that you've taken from lessons or things that you've been exposed to, and then how you can pull that into the present and then inform the future with that. That's really really interesting to hear because we have never really spoken about necessarily those chapters in your life and how they've informed you today. So if we're then going into the financial advisor realm, I'm assuming we're talking about people who run businesses. We're talking about people who most likely have a family. And and there's a broad spectrum, as I know, who your clients are in terms of wealth and background and all of that. But what are some of the common problems as such that they come towards you with? And what I would like to hear is the things that they state that are their problems, and they might be real, but then also the things that you now know are part of the problem, but they are just not aware of before they speak to you.
yeah, it's interesting. It's really fascinating because as the practice has grown, um, we've brought in a more diverse group of people. So I think I mentioned you last year, the tail end of last year, we brought on our first professional football player. Um, I've got a brain surgeon. I've got a guy who looks after yachts in Monaco. I've got a lot of scaffolders. I've got everything. Um, but there's a theme, an underlying theme that touches all of them, just in different ways. And the biggest one is an element of despair due to a lack of understanding and clarity. And Martin, Professor Martin, our friend, he's got a great definition of stress, and I've never heard it delivered that way. And he talks about stress. He defines it as the imbalance between the load of the challenge that you're facing and the resources you've got. And what I've now realized when I speak to people is actually when it comes to finance, we don't really know what the challenge is, and we really don't know the resources we have. And it's very difficult because it's a very loud space. There's just so much noise out there. So you're very difficult to get sort of quiet wisdom and clarity. And it just causes staggering levels of despair. at all ends of the spectrum of the social chain. Um, and it's particularly for me, business owners particularly get a bad sort of treatment in this country, both culturally and obviously legislation through tax and things like that. So there's a lot of there's very few people that can get themselves into a space of financial resilience. And we can define financial resilience after, but I think when we talk about resilience, it's a phrase that's bounded around quite a lot, especially with in the groups of sort of people we are now because of the algorithms are listening to it. So we hear resilience everywhere, right?
Mhm.
But I think when we look at resilient as a person, if we were looking at table legs and four of them, if you're going to have four, you could probably get away with three, but reality you want four. One of those has to be financial resilience. Unless your first name's Shake or you hunt for your food, right? If financial resilience isn't a core pillar of your life, then either directly or indirectly, it's causing you an element of despair. And there's spillover effects that aren't particularly good for that.
Yeah.
And that happens. So back to that. Sorry, I know that's a long-winded answer, but that touches everyone I speak to in some way, shape, or form, even the ultra wealthy.
Mhm. What is then financial resilience as a broad definition, both for the ultra wealthy as well as the small business owner?
I think for me, my definition of it's a coin. So there's two sides of it. So you've got the practical, objective, unemotional side of um, on a balance sheet, am I financially resilient? As in, am I am I spending less than I earn or less than I've got? And could I handle a brutal disruption in macroeconomic events and still really be able to sleep at night? And the other side is, can I talk about my finance without my heart rate increasing? Which is one that we miss out. And I think if you can do two of those, then you are financially resilient, which then means you don't actually have to be wealthy in definition terms or rich to be wealthy, to be financially resilient. I know some people who earn relatively modest amounts. They've got a modest amount of wealth and they're incredibly financially resilient. And the football player that I still won't name, obviously for disclosure, but when he first came to me, the level of despair that he was going through was, we would have to stop the conversation, come back out and talk about boxing to bring him back down to carry on to move. He was a very, very fragile individual, but incredibly wealthy
So that's
on the balance sheet.
fascinating. I know. So we're not going to go into the person. So
No, no,
forget
no, no,
forget who he is.
no.
But that, see, I think for a lot of us probably listening to that, that's puzzling, right? So we're talking about somebody who's making a lot of money.
Mhm.
We're talking about somebody who maybe then even on paper is wealthy. So what was missing? What could you possibly have lacking that you're not financially resilient?
Well, I think for him there was other issues, but and football players are interesting because they're a lot like soldiers in many ways. Soldiers who join at 16 are sort of brought into a system, don't have to think about money, right? And then they're dumped out the other side. Um, but football players have got, and this particular football player had been in an academy since he was 11, and his family weren't particularly great. Let's be honest. So I think that's probably the issue. And they were living off his funds and um, yeah, so every time he'd engage in any form of fiscal conversation, it meant that he was losing a large chunk of his wealth. And I think that and he was very conscious of that. And as he was getting less, his performance was dipping. He was concerned about because obviously their career ended like that, and so there was a lot of other issues in the background. But ultimately, he just didn't feel very financially resilient. And it's because he didn't really understand. It's back to that definition of stress. Stress and pressure was that he didn't understand the challenge he was facing, but he knew it was a dark cloud, and he didn't know what resources he had because every time he touched something, it went wrong because his family around him weren't really the trusted advisors that he needed. Right.
Mm.
That is an extreme example. I will say that. But typically, my group of clients are business owners, entrepreneurs, founders, business owners. There's three in the same bucket of that. And I find that I gravitated towards them because my industry don't really like to talk to people like that because they're hard. work. They're not easy to deal with until they've got to the other end. And then at the other end, my industry is really good at taking them to play golf and telling them how they can invest their money once they've sold their business. But I wanted to be in a position where I could create a pathway of clarity for people. And I've taken them, as you've seen, our framework we take them through in the workshops is actual business owners that were really, really stressed actually believe that their business is a prison in many cases. And we change that. We change the relationship with themselves, with money, with the business. And there's really positive spillover effects that come out of it. And I think I mentioned this before. One of the random reoccurring themes, particularly with our sort of middle group of clients, is weight loss, improved sleep, all that sort of really random, but really positive and great to see sort of spillover effect, right?
Mhm. So if we've got people listening to this and going back to your coin, you know, if we're gonna if they're gonna come on and you're gonna ask them about their finances and their heart rate goes up, what are things that you would just say, look, these are the fundamental issues and the fundamental things we would put in place right now in the next month or so to bring your heart rate down at least a bit.
The first one is ripping off the plaster, and I always talk about this because all progress starts with the truth, right? And it's sometimes quite messy, and I'm not even going to buy into it. And this is something that just doesn't cost you any money, and that is we sit them down and we make them we create an audit. So they get to see, and we use it, steel gases phrase, we think in ink. And we don't do it digitally, we don't use AI, we don't do anything. We literally say you are going to go and print off bank statements, credit card statements, everything because in a world of subscription and tapping of cards, very few people, especially people who are struggling, they don't remember they sleepwalk all day, right? And they don't actually understand how much they're spending and how much they're tapping their card and really um how much spillage or leakage in their life financially is going on. Once we can understand their number, we're looking for two things. So it's back to their number. If we find your number, your expenditure, almost always it'll improve immediately because they can see objectively the picture that they've got. I'll give you one example. There was a trader who I was looking after for a while. He's now left the UK, so we've had to pass bar company legislation wise, but we're on good terms. Really good lad, staggering overweight, social anxiety, really lonely. Didn't It was just bad. It was just all bad. So I started chatting to him, and because of the trading desk he was on, he'd sort of finish work about 1 in the morning. He'd come back in about 8, 9, spend about £30 from the trolley that came round because he was just carbs, just starving carbs. And so he was just like, right, okay, well, let's try and because I try and find a coffee a day. I've talked before. If we can lose the price of one coffee a day is a higher rate taxpayer. If you sacrifice the price of one coffee a day into your workplace pension, in 20 years' time, based on the previous market growth rates of the last 20 years, you'd have 170,000 more in your pension in 20 years' time, and you won't have noticed. It's just completely automated, right? Well, this particular lad needed to lose weight, needed to just, it was lots of things he wanted to do. And through his financial audit, I just said, well, look, why do you have to spend? Because you spend about £35 each day, which is not okay, it's not show-stopping for his wages, but it mattered. And he said, I can't because it's just a habit. And she comes round at my first coffee break. And I said, well, why don't we put a list of podcasts together? I should give him your podcast, shouldn't I, really? Give him a list of podcasts together. And as you're literally have your coffee break a little bit early and physically walk out the building. And he just within about 8 to 10 days of working, he'd completely snapped that out of his life. So he was losing weight. He was listening to something that was going to make him better than yesterday in some way, shape, or form. And he wasn't eating a load of crap, and he wasn't spending that 30 to £35 a day, which for him as a higher rate taxpayer was £60 a day pre-tax. Not going to shift the dial massively, but what it did, it gave him some agency and control and some clarity, right? You compound that, that matters. And that was the start of his journey. So you don't need much money to to start with your audit. And then from the audit we build down.
Awesome, awesome. I saw Ryan commenting here in terms of I think the bit in terms of the tapping versus being aware with your cash and how different that is. And I think what one thing that I've always noticed in the last few years has been the difference when you're going abroad. And if you're like preloading, like a post office or whatever other card you're using, but you're preloading it, and you're like, well, this is the budget I have for the holiday, and
Hmm.
then you're really on it, right? You're like, okay, so we've got $50 a day now, and we've spent 60 today, so we need to bring it in tomorrow again, and you're just so much more on it. But it's a holiday thing, and then you forget about it. But actually, what you're saying is, well, in a way, you need to probably become a bit obsessed with that stuff for a while and
Hmm.
really understand, okay, all this tapping, all the subscription, all the, double click on your phone to get the next load of apps or software subscription or whatever, they all matter. And we need to really maybe put some obstacles, I guess, in a way to be a bit more aware of that again. Is that something?
I agree. I had a young couple not so long ago, and we did an audit, and they identified £2,800 a month that they didn't need to spend. That's a lot of money when you're a higher rate taxpayer. A month. That's close to a 60,000 salary at a 45% taxpayer, right? Because you're paying 47%. So broadly speaking, it's double, right? And that was each of them. So it was just crazy. It was crazy. Um, but they you can't do anything else around financial planning. So here in the UK, so we've got a lot. I know we've got a lot of friends from across the pond, and I know you pay tax, but in the UK, the tax has just got insane right now, and because it's such a marginal, or what we call a progressive tax system, which basically means those that work get punished and those that don't get rewarded, right? That's basically what it is in a nutshell. But for those, so when we can remove, you know, it's not hard to remove £1,000 a month from someone's expenditure when they're paying large amounts of tax and they're losing things like child tax credit and they're losing nursery school vouchers, things like that. It's such a huge difference that just that one thing, and nine times out of 10, it's linked to food that they don't even realize they're eating. And I'll say, you ate out. You ate out, 28 times last month. No, I didn't. You did. It's there. It's in black and white. Did you? Now, if you enjoy eating out, if that's your thing, great. But if you didn't remember it, it's probably not that memorable. So maybe we could start something there, right? And my job is to tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. So that's my fiduciary responsibility right there. So it does go very, very quickly one or two ways. It's either thanks for your time, good luck, or those that really lean into this, because once they sort that out, then we can move into tax planning, then we can move into long-term investing. And it doesn't take long to turn this around. And indisciplines and disciplines do not remain self-contained. It's back to making your bed, right? You make your bed, you get something else is going to go well for you that day. And the spillover effects I find are pretty tangible from a visual perspective with these clients.
Hmm. So if somebody comes to you and again you're starting the conversation and their heart rate goes up, what is the time frame that it takes for them to, you get the clarity, you're honest, you see what's happening, all of this stuff, to then sorting out the major fundamental building blocks of financial resilience, to then finding a new way of life, and then looking at long-term investments and all of that. How long does that take for somebody traditionally
It
for you?
that one is very specific to the person, but it can be typically if they lean into it quite quickly and they've got an element of resource in the background they didn't realize they had, or they realized they had, they didn't know how to deploy it. That could be as short as 3 months. Then I'd say the longest it's been for a couple of my clients that have stayed the course, I'd say 2 to 3 years. I mean, some people will always have an element of anxiety around money because we pick that up as through our childhood, through a past trauma and things like that. But lowering it to where it would have been is my job. I can't necessarily lower it till you've turned into a sort of Zen monk, but it's it's definitely it's definitely removing that despair, particularly for men as well. It affects men far more than women. I know women get more anxious about it, and women do get snappy when I mention this. Obviously, I tend to not have many female clients for obvious reasons. But actually, for men, there's definitely an archetype because for us to chip away at our belief system in ourselves that we can't provide for ourselves or others is, I think, it's quite dangerous. I mean, you look at the suicide rates in men, and then you look at the amounts that financial pressures add to that suicide. I'm amazed that we haven't come to this conclusion a lot quicker,
Mhm.
particularly the financial resilience of men needs to be fixed pretty quickly. But we don't teach it in schools, but we do teach gender studies in schools, which is really important, of course. So we've decided to pick a topic that was really useful as opposed to one that, wouldn't have really mattered, right? So, but I have a big issue with our education system, and I'm sure many do.
Um, yes.
We'll
Di
leave that one out of the shorts as well, yeah,
diplomatic,
mate.
diplomatic, yes. Um, I want to open the call also up for everybody in the room, so you can just put your digital hand up. But my last question for you for now, and I've got more, if it's just you and I, but in terms of what you've just talked about, what is, and again, this call we obviously we've got dads on here. So what are resources or things that you have found to be very useful for dads to talk to their kids about when it gets to financial resilience and education? And you've just touched upon that.
Well, one of the aims that I have as well is when we're financially resilient, we then don't contaminate the next generation with it. Okay. So my job is to also help break that intergenerational chain of this. And that's a real challenge, but it's an implied task, not a direct task, right? But it's something that I needed to do with my son. So there's three books, and I'll send you the link after for them if you want. But there's three books I can name off the top of my head. So there's one called Saving Your Acorns. It's a British book, Robert Gardner. But that's for sort of 2 to 5 year olds. The Richest Man in Babylon's got a one for kids. My son Yestin loves all these books, by the way, we read them together. And then there's the final one called Grandpa's Fortune Fables, which I really recommend when they're sort of um, between 8 and 12. I give copies of these books to my clients and I ask them to read them and then read them to their kids. Now, the reason why I think it's important for adults to read kids' books around finance is that we pick up our bad habits or our questionable relationships with money when we're children. So it's probably, I'm no psychologist, but it's probably a good idea to have that delivered to you in child form. And the other point is as well, let's be call this honest now, is that if a knuckle dragger like me can go from nothing to chartered in a very short period of time, it highlights that it isn't that complicated. You can teach a child this. And we don't need to overcomplicate it. So the evergreen basics around financial resilience, you should be able to teach. I call it the Aston test. That's my son. Is that he, from the age of 7, particularly about 7 was when he was investing, he knew the rules to wealth, which we talk about, which is, he saves 2 out of every 10 he gets, he invests that into assets through diversification, he avoids tax, and he protects himself on the way. And he's repeats that sort of almost like a mantra, right? Um, what I've just said to you there, that is, they're the pillars I put in. I'm helping people exit their business with 20, 30 million under those pillars. We don't need to overcomplicate this. It's just world champion basics is what my practice does, but it's basics nonetheless. So when we're talking to our kids, definitely read the book. The first two I mentioned, you can read them in about 10 minutes. So it's great. So you can even converse, and give your kids pocket money and get them to segregate their money in front of you
So
when they get it.
physical money.
Physical money, I give to Yastin, and he physically puts some into a pot, into one wallet, and some he can spend.
Hmm.
And he doesn't have to spend right away. He can save it to an accumulate and buy what he wants, but he's investing that pot is investing on day one. So when he starts earning, he's going to do that.
Okay. So that is kind of something that you mentioned earlier, which was the Think in Ink. Is that a general like one of the core elements for anybody really to take away? I think in our current financial world, is to bring it back to the tangible, right? So the printed out receipts, the bank statements, some physical form of cash or understanding of where does my money move to. Is that one of the ways to just bring a bit more consciousness
Yeah,
to that?
if you were going to bring it back to the beginning to start, yes. I mean, you wouldn't need to do that indefinitely, but some people need that to. But definitely for the audit, my view on the audit is definitely that, right? Um, I last week I had a client and he's a tech. He works in tech. He's an IT consultant. He's never going to write anything down. He never has done for the last 30 years, right? So he wrote his his own AI, sort of fed all his bank statements in, and then they put it into color charts for him. Just as impactful for him. But broadly speaking, I think thinking in ink, kitchen table, Saturday morning. Don't do it in a weeknight because you're not going to sleep that night. Do it with your significant other. I'll say with the suspense, it'll all be your fault, not hers. But at least then you know where we're starting because all progress starts with the truth. And the other thing is as well, I'm not turning this into sort of a loose women session here, but one of the best investments you're going to have is your significant other. And if you've never had a meaningful conversation about how we audit what we spend and which direction we're going to head in, you might want to find that out early on. Yeah, I think back to your question, bringing it back to the basics, keeping it simple. Investing is simple. Every part of what I do is simple. Don't get me wrong, it's not, it's not completely novice. It's the fundamentals are basic. And what we find as well is we're changing people's relationship and expenditure. So when we start talking about the expenditure, they then can accumulate some money so they can have a pot of money because they've got their number now. We've turned them into their own chief financial officer back to they need £6,000 a month. They can then save enough money to have 2, 3, maybe even 6 months pot over here because they've slowed their spending down. We can do some tax avoidance because they can sacrifice some of their work, their income into their investments through their pensions. And then when they realize that they wouldn't have got any of that money anyway, but they've sacrificed and it goes into their long-term wealth, everything changes. Every part of their brain, their pathways open. But what I find is really nice, it's a nice spillover, is that when markets dip, when markets crash, my clients ring me excited and they say, I just put £1,000 a month and I wouldn't have got it anyway because the taxman would have taken it. And because of the tariffs, the market's down 20%. So I'm buying it for cheaper. So you've got working class people now behaving like the top 1%. They've worked that out themselves. Their relationship with both their auditing, their expenditure, their savings, their investments, their tax planning, it's all falling into place because they got the first number right at the top.
Yeah.
And then they teach their children that, and their children do it from 18 as opposed to when they're 38 when I get hold of them. And that breaks the cycle.
So powerful. And interestingly
Uh,
enough, it's the same with all the other. I mean, you mentioned one of your table legs, so we need to figure out what the other three are for you. But if we're talking about diet or fitness, and I would say even business, even if you're running a business, it's again it just goes back to those fundamentals. Like we love making it more complicated than it needs to be, but
yeah.
diet isn't complicated, exercise isn't complicated, none of it is. But so just bringing it back to those basics is exactly what we need to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, we work in ground zero with over complexity, right? The financial services are brilliant at it, right? You want to sit down with someone on a derivatives desk, they'll complicate the shit out of everything to the point that they forget what their name is by the end of the conversation, right? But it is exactly that. It's complexity isn't brilliant. It is just tax on your nervous system. And we feel that we need a complicated solution to a complicated problem, and 9 times out of 10, we don't. And that's not just in finance. It's back to that point, is that if I can change the habit so they can do it forever, right? It would be like, fizz is a good example, fitness is a good example, right? If you could just do, I don't know, your 100 air squats, 100 press ups, do your 12,000 steps, 10,000 steps a day, and nothing else until you're 70, right? I mean, I'm not saying that's all the training you should do, but if that's all you could do, the likelihood of you living an extra decade healthy is exponentially higher than jumping into CrossFit for 2 or 3 months and then ripping your pec off or snapping your disc or doing something else and being out the game for 12 months and then back in. Is that actually just slow and steady and consistently and having that environmental habitual framework around you works in finance, but it works in diet and it works in everything else, and it just spills over, and you can just replicate it for your 4 legs.
Hmm. I want to get Jan in. Jan, you had a question?
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you. I'd like to go back to like breaking that cycle. I mean, personally, first coming from personal experience, I was raised by boomer parents who were spendthrifts and always thought that they didn't have enough money for things. Even though, I mean, early on they didn't, but wealth accumulated and they were able to do that. But that they imparted that kind of like mentality of lack onto my brother and I. You know, I do quite well, but I still feel like I don't have enough. And I feel like and so that was one of the key things that I called out in an earlier session of one of the things that I want to work on is kind of breaking that cycle for myself. My kids, they're good. They've got a great relationship with money. My wife is the daughter of an accountant. She knows how to deal with this stuff, and she's a business owner, and she knows how to do this. And she's imparting that on my kids. It's been hard for me to like adapt to that because it's so ingrained into my core that I've inherited it. It's like, and so I'm wondering what you do and how you work with people, to break that out of their own mentality.
Yeah, it's a very good question, particularly from my business owners who 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 have this fiscal issue and what I call proximity bias. And they too, when you're a business owner that's selling a product, it can collide in a negative way. Big one is I can't really sell it for that much. That's loads of money, and I don't really do that much. And you're like, well, actually, you do. Just because you do it every day, you don't realize how brilliant it is, and actually, you don't realize how much money exists out there to pay for your product. Which I know isn't your question, but I get a lot of that with the business owners. I'm very similar because I grew up in with single mum who comes to state very, I mean, when I joined the army, my first Northern Ireland tour, I got £24 a day because I was on extra ops pay, so it was £1 an hour, and I honestly thought I was a porn star, right? It was just crazy. But I think the way I do it, so I start with my son. I talk to him about money in a way that he has to manage his money. He can't waste it, but there is an endless supply of it. So I explained to that of we live in Wales, it rains all the time. There will never be a shortage of water here, right? But it doesn't mean we're going to leave the tap on,
Mhm.
right? We're never going to leave the tap on to let it run out, but they'll always be there when we need it. So we'll respect it. We won't waste it, but it's there. Because if you leave the tap on and you go out, it'll flood the kitchen and things will go bad, right? But there's plenty there. And that's a simple one that I do with my son. And then I try and build on that with the business owners. And then this is where I keep saying I keep things simple, but I try and explain to them fractional reserve banking and things like that money is actually getting printed every time you put money in. But there's loads of money out there. And between the tap and the fractional reserve banking, it sort of hits home a little. But I think to keep it simple, it's never going to go away because I'm the same. So example, I hold an alarming amount of cash versus even though I invest a lot, I'm an investor, right? Um, I I've just got this paranoia that I've got to create multiple incomes just in case the income that I earn stops, which is a logical piece, but it's illogical as well because I hold enough cash to pay bills that I don't even have. I'm even making up fictitious bills that I might have one day hypothetically and be able to pay them for 12 months. So I hold way too much cash, which is causing, it's a very first world problem. I understand this. I'm not going to start a GoFundMe page so you can try and help me out with it. But it, it'll never fully go away. And I think you've got it there. But I think the starting point is that you've acknowledged it and you can see it's there. That's big. Um, your wife's going to manage money well in terms of how your children manage money. I think the big one as well is that we manage it well. And the reason we manage it well is because there's massive opportunity on the other side of the hill. And I think trying to keep that balance, and it's really difficult, isn't it? Because it's a thankless task, isn't it? You want to teach your children to be independent, but you don't want them to be too independent. They don't need you. That's another issue as well, which sort of fills up. I'm not sure if I answered your question here, but I don't know whether there's anything that you could use.
Yeah, I mean, like the kids, they were counting their cash in their banks last, in their little banks last night. They're fine with them. It's really on like my personal mentality and breaking that
Mm.
cycle of feeling the lack. And my wife does these exercises with us about where we calculate our net worth and we see what we have, and like that puts you at ease. But for some reason or another, it still bubbles up within me, and I just guess I need to do more
I think as well,
digging on how to break that cycle for myself.
yeah, and I think there's something called Martin talks about it, and I talk about at the end of my framework that I take people through, and I call it instructional self-talk. So instructional self-talk's a big one. So we talk about it in the military a lot, and because you can have positive self-talk, and positive self-talk is dangerous because you can literally, you could be coming out of a Tony Robbins sort of 2-day seminar thinking you can eat coal and walk on fire and stuff like that, and you probably can't without burning your feet. I don't know, but I haven't tried it, right? Maybe you can, but that positive self-talk will only get you so far because at some point your brain will go, "Do I actually know this?" But instructional self-talk, the framework that I deliver means that they can actually talk their way through the framework every time. And so it can be a case of, right. And for you, every time you think it, you can say, right, stop. Maybe not right now if I'm doing something that I can't stop, but at lunchtime, I'm going to go away with my notepad and I'm going to write down, because I know my number. I know I need this much each month. And we know we've got this much in cash over here because my wife's an accountant. She's got a shit together. And we know we've got 36 months of that. No point in human history of useful people not being able to earn money for 36 months. It'd have to be a macroeconomic event that would mean that you just need to be good at hunting now, right? So I think you can sort of engage in a bit of that, instructional self-talk would work.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, good questions, Jan. Really like that. I love the tap analogy. That is so good. And I think something you and I have spoken about as well, which is it used to be instilled on us, at least for me, and the way I grew up in terms of wealth, it was always this thing of this amount of money, right? So when we grew up, it used to be like a million, right? So the million euro, pound, whatever. But if you had a million, you'd be set for life. Like that was the thing. And unless you reached that point, you weren't wealthy. Like you were nothing until that point was reached in a way. But also to flip that and actually just think like, so, what is your number? What is the monthly you need? And as you rightly said as well, it's like, well, what are all the opportunities available to me right now to make that money, to make that number happen? Even if everything fell away, what could I do? And I
Mm.
think even that might just bring down your stress level, just knowing, well, but I could do this, this, and this, or maybe I need to do two things, but I know I can. And that could help. But I'll let Steve. Steve, you've got a question. Let you come in.
Yeah, sorry, I know because we've only got 2 minutes left. I don't want
No, it's fine, it's
We're
fine.
good.
to make you run over, but it's just a quick one because you were talking about business owners, and I'm just starting out very early on in a small business, and I've already noticed so early on something you were talking about earlier, which was the way we now tap things instead of use cash, and how direct debits just seem to quickly come out. You don't notice them. This is already happening with me. Well, I'll sign up to a system online, um, and then I don't use it for a couple of months, and I kind of forget. And every now and then I'll get an email that says, "Oh, here's your monthly charge for this," and I think, "Ah, I should have cancelled this." But basically, my question relating to that is, do you have a lot of clients that struggle in this way? And is there like a simple accounting software system or something similar, just a bit like a simple one that you recommend to get a good view of this quite easily?
Well,
Oh, here's the star of the show.
so hello. Do you want to tell me your wealth habits quickly?
Save 2 out of 10 of all the money you have. Invest that tuned assets by using diversification, by not buying one factory company,
Yeah.
by buying thousands of factories. Be patient, avoid tax and protect yourselves while doing that.
There we are. It's done. Everyone's done. Everyone's happy. That's it. We can
Well
go now.
done.
No. Good.
Bravo. That was amazing.
So I'll see you in the morning, mate. Good night. Good night. Good night. Sorry. So
Don't,
sorry.
don't forget to give him the extra tenner for coming in.
I know exactly that. Yeah,
Pretending that this was spontaneous. I mean,
no,
well
exactly
done.
that. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
his good night. It's good night. Chat. Back to the you mentioned about software again. Do you know? Seriously, now, early on, one of the best auditing tools you can have if you just starting your business is being disciplined that you've got obviously a separate business account, and anything that's related to the business comes to the business account. And what ends up happening is your bank statement becomes your profit and loss sheet. Because if you're only going to get paid in, it's really simple. It's really easy what's coming in. You can literally, it's there in black and white. There's so many analytics now within different business accounts anyway. But even the basic bank statement, because I speak to a lot of people that go, oh, I want to use Xero, I want to use this, and early on, they've just got so. My job is to remove as much to think about and automate as much as possible early on. And automating the habits is a big one. But early on, I would say it's just that. Obviously, if you've got thousands of things going out your bank, then yes, you're going to need to speak to your accountant and come up with a software that you both understand. But when I say both understand, you need to understand it more than he does because you're the one that's driving it, right? Because your business needs to really remove as much sort of attention away and then energy away. So, you need to be able to automate it so it's just really simple to deal with early on, particularly early on. It's your first 1 to 3 years that are key.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Awesome. Right, Kevin. Can you give us the other 3 table legs?
Oh, wow. I think that's different for everybody, right? But for me, well, I actually break mine up into I've got 3, and I've got what I call the 4th one, which is the vortex. And actually, I'm going to be able to show you a picture of how I keep myself honest every week. Can I share the screen?
I think you should be able to, yeah.
Can we see that? And
Yeah.
again, as you can see, I like to think in ink, right? So I have 3 objectives, and then the vortex is just life. Okay. So my first one is objective 1 is family. Objective 2 is being fit for service. So fit for service is phys, diet, discipline to a certain extent, maybe personal development. And then objective 3 is my business and my clients. And then vortex is just life, which is, for example, we've got some rental properties, we've got some other assets that need doing, and I can't ignore them. They don't fit in here nicely. And it allows me then, and I've got almost like a mission statement for each objective and goals every year in January. And what I then try and do, I'm only allowed, it isn't a to-do list, it's just 7 things that I have to do on an automated basis, right? That in that week, and my goal becomes to make sure that those things get done and I try and have it stack as much as possible, right? So when I talk about objective 1, yesterday just met, my morning routine with him is non-negotiable. So I get up 6:30, spend an hour with him. We have breakfast together. We do a bit of training, pull-ups, a bit of air squats, a bit of boxing. Then he showers, makes his bed, and then he goes to school. And then I do this horrible little circuit after. But by 8:30, I've sort of walked into really important things that if the rest of the day falls off a cliff, I've nailed objective 1 and objective 2, the bulk of it already, and then I can start doing things like this. And I write this on the Sunday. I call it my Sunday ritual. So that's what I'm going to be doing next week, if you like. And then this Sunday I do an audit and I write wins, gains, progress, because at one point I was just ticking, did I do it? Did I not do it? And it was getting quite negative. Because some of your projects will be enduring. So you're not going to, did I crack it? Well, no, because it's still, for example, my website was about 6 months to work on. Was there progress? Yes, I can write progress, gains, wins. I can, at the bottom, I'll leave this open for areas to improve on. But I'll spend half an hour to 40 minutes on a Sunday auditing last week and planning next week. But it's all part of the overarching goals for the 3 typically four legs, but the three pillars and then the life in general that I have to catch, you know. And it keeps me honest, and it's back to that keeping thinking in ink. It's sort of it ties it together quite nicely.
Mm.
You avoid mission creep because then it means if I'm even stupid things like my air squats, pull-ups, and my horrible circuit, did I do it 5 times? I'm not gonna, you're not gonna bump into me at April and I haven't trained for, oh, I can't remember the last time I trained. I'll know. It'll tell me on Sunday. And to be clear, some weeks are a car crash, but I can test and adjust to make it happen. It's nothing. There's no negative compounding creeping up on us. And I just think having that, and it is about 30 to 40 minutes of just having that time in the week saves so much time for the rest of the week.
Yeah. So it's all about being strategic and then following simple steps across multiple domains that
Yeah.
ensure that you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, because you can fall forward then, right? If you have a really bad week, you're still gained on a lot of things.
Yeah. And
Um,
that's that
and
is that is huge in terms of the positive momentum. I know what you said in terms of positive self-talk. And it isn't that because all you're doing is actually looking back and yes, your ideal week might have comprised of 35 things to do, but actually if you're realizing, well, I've done 20, like I have moved the needle significantly,
mm,
then that's a really good thing to acknowledge and stack those wins to say, you know what, like, you've spent every morning with your son in a meaningful way. You've won as a dad. Fine,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, absolutely. And that's the non-negotiable because actually there's a spillover effect there because I'm without a doubt a better advisor, non-exec director, stuff like that. All of that, I'm better because of my son and the time I spend with him in the morning. And I make sure that if every client I deal with and I take on, I will look after them the same as if their money's as if it's my son's money. Everything is built around that, right? And then you can't go wrong really because you all your values are aligned that way, all your habits are aligned that way. Everything's just automated. James King's book, Accelerating Excellence, sorry, is a really good masterclass for that because I don't need to make any decisions. Like I don't eat the first half of the day, and I do all my phys in the morning, and I spend my hour with my son. And by 8:30, I'm in front of the computer, and then I can do the nonsense of half an hour, walk out of the office, come back and do 2 hours deep work on a client that's dealing with an issue. They've got me, no, nothing else, phone's off. It's done then. I haven't thought about any of this. My clothes, I know what I'm wearing for the week. I don't think about it. I know it's all, I know it sounds silly and but you can compound, and I'm a bit of a numbers freak. So I want to be able to, when I was writing my New Year's goals, if you like, was the question really was what will have to have happened in 2026 for me to look back and on this year in December and go, that was a good year. And I think if you start from that, and it's not a wish list of stupidity. It's actually a reality. Is that you can do anything, but not everything, right? So if I could look back from the phys perspective and say, well, I think I did the numbers I posted on the group. If I saved, I think 280,000 calories by missing breakfast every day and didn't hurt, and I did 2,000 pull-ups and 30,000 air squats, and then compounding, I can't really. I might not feel that I've done that much training, but when it's in black and white, you can say, well, actually, you have done this, and we've got enough time for that, right? Because I strip it because I do it at my back door. So I'm back to I need to go to the gym. I don't need to get in the car to go to the gym. I don't need to stop and talk to people. I don't all of that, just all that element there is less than my training sessions.
Mm.
And it matters then because then I'm not wasting time. I don't have the time. And I turn this into my compliance officer because I work on my own in isolation. So you've got to keep yourself honest, right?
I think that's a really important one to take away for I'm looking at you, Steve, here, knowing that you've got those struggles as somebody, work like somebody who used to work in an office with people and then working on your own business by yourself is hard when you don't have that person looking over
Yeah.
your shoulder. So it really is about systematizing it. And I think just to reiterate the positive element there, which I think is really, really important rather than just looking always at, and again, this is a generic point looking at where you're failing, and then you might be doing I need to do Pomodoro technique and all of this stuff to just like try and stay on track. It's always looking at the negative of like, oh, how do I not waste time? But what
Mm.
you're doing is also it's just saying like I'm proving to myself by staying consistent and by tracking it that I am moving in the right direction. So I'm creating inertia, I'm creating momentum, and that makes you, without sounding too grandiose, but it makes it unstoppable because you are traveling.
Yeah, yeah. And then you can have your vision, so your goal then just becomes your habit. Your goal isn't your 12-month vision is your direction of travel. And then your goal is to create the environmental and habitual structure. So environmental's big as well. Because, my pull-up bars at the kitchen door, my circuit is on the flagstone outside the door. So I open the kitchen door. I have to close it behind me to do my circuit in front of me. I literally commute one step to my circuit. So for me to miss that, I would have had to have, you're gonna have to do some convincing to myself as to why I missed it.
Mm.
You're removing friction from the things you need to do, and you're putting friction in front of things that you don't want to do. You're right, and I think the auditing. I didn't add the gains, wins, and progress immediately. For about a year, I was just doing what am I planning next week, and the audit was just tick or cross, and then I go on to the next page and then make sure I could transfer it across. But it was becoming quite negative because I was focusing on the things I was missing as opposed to actually, well, hang on a minute, I've got 70 to 80% of these things done,
Yeah,
and that
I've done
matters,
good.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Kev, I think with that, we will say thank you. Thank you very much for a fascinating bit more than an hour, both in terms of your backstory as well as the very, very practical, tangible things that I think everybody can take away from that.